I'm Morgan, 28, and my dad was my hero until my mom died and he married Allison. We were inseparable before she came along, but everything changed when she gave him an ultimatum. It's either her or me. When he chose her, cutting me from his life, I was devastated beyond words. But what they didn't know was that I wouldn't just disappear. I had a plan brewing that neither of them saw coming, one that would reveal her true colors and bring my father back to his senses. Before I dive into my story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to fight for someone you love. Growing up, I was blessed with parents who adored each other. My dad Greg and mom Diane were college sweethearts who built a beautiful life together in our suburban home in Pennsylvania. Dad worked as an architect while mom taught elementary school, and our home was always filled with laughter and warmth. My earliest memories include Dad teaching me to ride a bike, Mom helping with science projects, and our annual family camping trips to Lake Erie. I was especially close to my dad. He called me his little shadow because I followed him everywhere, helping him with house projects and asking endless questions about how things worked. He never seemed annoyed. Instead, he'd explain everything patiently, treating my curiosity as something precious. Mom would smile watching us, saying we were two peas in a pod. Everything changed when I was 23. Mom was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer that spread quickly despite treatment. Those 8 months were brutal, watching my vibrant, loving mother wither away in hospice care. Dad was by her side constantly, holding her hand until her final breath. After she died, Dad fell apart. He took leave from work, barely ate, and spent days staring at old photo albums. I moved back home temporarily to help him through his grief. I'd make sure he ate, paid the bills, and occasionally coaxed him outside for short walks. Those months were painful, but strengthened our bond. We'd sit together in the evenings sharing memories of Mom, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing at funny stories. About 8 months after Mom passed, Dad reluctantly joined a grief support group at my suggestion. That's where he met Allison. She was a widow according to her story, lost her husband 2 years prior to heart disease. She was 42, 10 years younger than Dad, with perfect blonde hair and a warm smile that seemed to breathe life back into him. When Dad first mentioned Allison, I was cautiously optimistic. She really understands what I'm going through, Morgan, he told me, his eyes showing a spark I hadn't seen in months. I encouraged the friendship, grateful someone was helping him heal. Their relationship progressed rapidly. Within 2 months, they were dating. After 4 months, Dad called me over for dinner to announce their engagement. I was shocked by the speed, but tried to hide my concern. Are you sure this isn't too soon? I asked gently. When you know, Dad replied, squeezing Allison's hand. Your mother would want me to be happy. Allison smiled sweetly. I'll never replace your mom, Morgan. I just want to take care of your dad and make him smile again. Though uncomfortable with the timing, I swallowed my reservations. Dad seemed happier than he had been since Mom died, and I wanted that for him more than anything. They married at the courthouse just 2 weeks later. It was nothing like my parents' wedding, which had been a big family celebration according to the photos. This was quick, with only me, Uncle Robert, and Allison's friend Stephanie present. Dad didn't even call his sister Catherine to tell her. After the wedding, subtle red flags began appearing. Allison moved into our family home immediately. Within days, she began refreshing the house. Mom's carefully chosen curtains disappeared, replaced by modern blinds. The comfortable living room furniture was swapped for sleek, uncomfortable pieces. Mom's garden was deemed overgrown and re-landscaped. Each change felt like erasing Mom further from our lives. When I mentioned keeping some things the same, Allison responded with, I understand you miss your mother, but Greg needs a fresh start without constant reminders, making him sad. Dad nodded along, though I caught glimpses of doubt in his eyes when looking at the transformed living room where he and Mom had spent countless evenings. The first major incident came when I discovered Mom's collection of hand-painted teacups missing from the china cabinet. Oh, I packed those away, Allison explained casually. They were collecting dust, and we never used them. Those teacups represented Saturday afternoons with Mom, our special tea time tradition. Seeing them removed felt like another piece of her being deliberately erased from our home. I retrieved the box from the garage and took the collection to my apartment without mentioning it to Allison. As weeks passed, I noticed Dad calling less frequently. Our Sunday brunches became monthly, then sporadic. Each time I visited the house, another piece of Mom seemed to have vanished, along with the comfortable relationship Dad and I had rebuilt during his grief. Within 3 months of the wedding, Allison's true personality began emerging through the cracks of her perfect stepmother facade. Her comments started subtly, often when Dad wasn't in the room. "Graphic design is such an unstable career path," she remarked one evening while Dad was grilling. "Have you thought about getting a real job with benefits? Your father worries about you." When I mentioned a promotion at my design agency, Allison somehow turned the conversation to her niece, who was making 6 figures in pharmaceutical sales right out of college. Dad, once my biggest cheerleader, remained silent during these exchanges, occasionally offering a week. "Morgan's doing fine, honey." The frequency of my visits became another point of contention. "You're here an awful lot for someone with her own apartment," Allison commented one Sunday. "Don't you have friends your age to spend time with?" One evening, I arrived earlier than expected for dinner and overheard Allison in the kitchen with Dad. "I love Morgan, but she relies on you too much, Greg. It's not healthy how she clings to you. We need space to build our marriage without your daughter dropping by constantly." Dad's response was barely audible. "She's just having a hard time adjusting. It's been almost a year since Diane died. We all need to move forward," Allison replied firmly. I quietly backed away from the door, feeling sick. When I returned later, making my arrival obvious, Allison greeted me with her usual smile, as if nothing had happened. Dad's behavior changed too. Once decisive and outspoken, he became passive around Allison, deferring to her opinions and preferences. He started checking his phone when she texted, sometimes abruptly ending our conversations to call her back immediately. If I brought up concerns about their relationship, he would change the subject or make excuses to leave. The incident with Mom's keepsake happened 6 months into their marriage. Dad and I had maintained one tradition after Mom died: monthly dinners at her favorite Italian restaurant. Allison typically claimed to be busy these nights, giving us rare time alone together. After one such dinner, I brought over a framed photo of Mom and me at my college graduation that I'd found while cleaning my apartment. "I thought you might want this for your office, Dad," I said, handing him the silver frame Mom had specially engraved. His eyes softened as he took it. "I remember this day. Mom was so proud of you." Later that evening, as we sat in the living room with after-dinner coffee, Allison accidentally knocked the frame off the side table while reaching for her drink. The glass shattered and the frame bent. Instead of apologizing, she seemed annoyed. "These tables are too cluttered," she said, sweeping up the glass. "This is why I've been trying to minimize the knickknacks." Dad quickly jumped up. "It's just an accident, Morgan. We can get the frame fixed." But the damage was done. The engraving was scratched beyond repair, and the look on Allison's face told me it wasn't entirely accidental. As summer approached, family gatherings became battlegrounds. Dad's birthday dinner was rescheduled last minute when I had already requested time off work. The annual 4th of July barbecue tradition was canceled because Allison suddenly planned a couple's weekend away. Each time I attempted to schedule one-on-one time with Dad, something would mysteriously come up. My friends noticed the change in me. After canceling plans repeatedly, Jasmine and Tyler staged an intervention over coffee. "You're not yourself anymore, Morgan," Jasmine said gently. "All you talk about is Allison and your dad. It's consuming you." Tyler was more direct. "Your dad's a grown man who made his choice. You need to focus on your own life." But they didn't understand. The dad who chose Allison wasn't the father I knew. Something was wrong, and it was getting worse. The final piece fell into place when I borrowed Dad's phone to call mine when I couldn't find it during a visit. A notification popped up from a phone monitoring app. Later, I discreetly checked his laptop and discovered Allison had been monitoring his calls, texts, and even his location. My father, once fiercely independent, was being tracked like a wayward teenager. Thanksgiving had always been Mom's holiday. She would spend days preparing, making everything from scratch, including her famous cranberry orange bread that Dad raved about each year. This would be the first Thanksgiving without her, and I wanted to honor her memory by contributing her special recipe to the meal. I called Dad beforehand to make sure it was okay. "That would be wonderful, sweetheart," he said, sounding genuinely touched. "Imisheplet." When I arrived with a freshly baked loaf, Allison's smile tightened. "Oh, I already made cranberry bread this morning," she said, pointing to her version on the counter. "I found a recipe online." "That's okay," I replied, trying to keep things light. "Now, we have extra." Throughout dinner, Allison kept steering conversations away from any mentions of past family Thanksgivings. When Dad's sister Catherine called during dessert, Allison answered his phone and said he'd call back later, then never gave him the message. The breaking point came when Dad took a bite of Mom's bread and closed his eyes in appreciation. "This tastes just like your mother's," he said softly. Allison's fork clattered against her plate. "I think it's dry, actually. Mine turned out much better." "They're both good," Dad said quickly, tension visible in his shoulders. "You don't have to pretend, Greg," Allison snapped. "Morgan clearly brought this to compete with me and make me look bad in my own home." "That wasn't my intention at all," I protested, feeling my face flush. "It's just a family recipe." "Family? I'm his family now, too." Allison's voice rose. "But you can't accept that, can you? Everything you do is about keeping your mother's ghost between us." Dad stood up, his expression pained. "Please, both of you. It's Thanksgiving." "I've tried so hard with her, Greg," Allison continued, tears suddenly appearing in her eyes. "Nothing I do is ever good enough. She doesn't want me to be part of this family." The argument escalated until I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my coat and purse, feeling ambushed and humiliated. Dad followed me to the door, looking torn. "She didn't mean it, Morgan. She's just sensitive about holiday traditions." "Dad, can't you see what she's doing? This isn't about bread." "Please don't go," he pleaded, but made no move to really stop me. I drove home in tears, feeling like I'd lost not just Mom, but Dad too. The next morning, Dad called and asked to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. My heart lifted slightly. Maybe he'd realized how unreasonable Allison had been. The man who met me looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. After awkward small talk about the weather, he cleared his throat. "Morgan, we need to talk about yesterday and about moving forward." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. "Allison and I had a long conversation last night. We both feel that there are some boundary issues we need to address." "Boundary issues?" I repeated, not comprehending. Dad couldn't meet my eyes. "You'll always be my daughter, but Allison is my wife now. She deserves respect and a chance for us to build our life together." "I do respect your marriage," I insisted. "But that doesn't mean I should be pushed out of your life." He sighed heavily. "That's not what this is about. But Allison feels that your visits are too frequent and that you're resistant to the changes in our family dynamic. Dad, she's isolating you from everyone who cares about you. When's the last time you talked to Uncle Robert or Aunt Catherine?" His expression hardened slightly. "That's exactly the attitude she's talking about. You make her out to be some kind of villain when she's just trying to be a good wife." Then came the words that shattered my world. "Allison has made it clear that she can't continue in a marriage where she feels constantly judged and compared to your mother. She's given me a choice." His voice broke slightly. "And Morgan, I can't lose her. I can't go through that pain again." "So you're choosing her over me?" I whispered, tears forming. "I'm asking for some space. Maybe we could take a break from our weekly calls and visits. Just until things settle down." I sat frozen, unable to process that my father was effectively cutting me out of his life. "How long is this break supposed to last?" I finally managed. "I don't know. Allison suggested we reassess after the holidays." "The holidays?" Our special family time. 2 months without my father. That evening, I discovered Dad had removed me as an authorized user on our joint account that we'd maintained since my college days. The final blow came 2 weeks later when he texted, not called, to cancel our traditional Christmas Eve dinner, saying he and Allison would be visiting her family in Arizona. My birthday in January passed without his usual early morning call. The father who had never missed a birthday in 28 years didn't even send a text. The pain was unbearable. I took leave from work, barely functioning through basic daily tasks. Jasmine came to stay with me for a week when she realized I wasn't answering calls or leaving my apartment. "This isn't healthy, Morgan," she said, watching me scroll through old photos of Dad and me. "You need to talk to someone professional." Through my fog of depression, a call came from family friend Martha, who had known my parents for decades. "I'm worried about your father, Morgan," she said hesitantly. "I ran into him at the grocery store, and he barely spoke to me. Allison did all the talking, and Greg looked diminished somehow. And she's been calling people from your mother's side of the family, telling them Greg doesn't want contact anymore." This wasn't just about me. Allison was systematically cutting every tie my father had. 3 months passed with no contact from Dad. My life had narrowed to work, my apartment, and weekly sessions with Dr. Bennett, a therapist specializing in family estrangement. "What you're experiencing is parental abandonment," she explained during one particularly difficult session. "Even though your father is still alive, you're grieving his presence in your life. I just don't understand how he could choose her over 30 years of our relationship," I said, wadding another tissue. "People in vulnerable emotional states can be manipulated, especially following a significant loss," Dr. Bennett replied. "Your father may not even realize the extent of what's happening." The inadvertent encounter came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was meeting Jasmine at an upscale restaurant downtown for her birthday when I spotted them across the dining room. Dad looked thinner, his normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. Allison was talking animatedly while he nodded, barely engaging. Our eyes met briefly before his widened in recognition, then quickly darted away. I stood frozen until Jasmine pulled me toward our table. "Do you want to leave?" she whispered. "No," I replied, though my hands trembled. "I need to at least say hello." I approached their table, heart pounding. That Allison. "Nice to see you both." Dad half rose, his movements uncertain. "Morgan, you look well." Allison's smile never reached her eyes. "What a surprise. We're actually just finishing up." She signaled for the check. "How have you been, Dad?" I asked, desperate to maintain the connection. Fine. "Busy with a new project at work," he mumbled, not elaborating. "We really need to get going," Allison interrupted, standing and collecting her purse. "Greg has an early meeting tomorrow." They left hurriedly, Dad casting one backward glance that contained something I couldn't quite identify. Regret? Fear? Whatever it wasn't the confident father I'd known my entire life. Compelled by a gut feeling, I made an excuse to Jasmine and followed them from a distance. In the parking lot, I watched their interaction from my car. Allison was gesturing angrily while Dad stood with slumped shoulders, taking her verbal assault without response. As he moved to open her car door, his sleeve rode up, revealing a purplish bruise encircling his wrist. My blood ran cold. Was she physically abusing him too? That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of my strong, proud father reduced to a submissive shadow haunted me. The next morning, I called in sick to work and began researching Allison in earnest. Her story about being a widow seemed impossible to verify. Searching marriage and death records in our state showed no deceased husband matching her description. Expanding my search, I discovered Allison had changed her name 5 years earlier from Alice Miller to Allison Parker. Uncle Robert called after I reached out to him for the first time in months. "I've been worried about you both," he admitted. "Greg won't return my calls anymore." "Have you noticed anything strange about Dad's behavior lately?" I asked carefully. A heavy pause followed. "The last time I saw him, about 6 weeks ago, he seemed different. Cautious about what he said, always checking with Allison before answering questions." Another pause. And Morgan, there's something else. Martha told me Allison convinced Greg to change his will. Everything now goes to her, with some small token amount to you. The betrayal stung, but it was confirmation of what I already suspected. Allison was systematically taking control of every aspect of Dad's life, including his assets. That afternoon, I visited a local antique shop where Mom had sold some of her vintage collection. The owner, Frederick, greeted me warmly. Morgan, I haven't seen you in ages. Your stepmother was just in last week selling more of Diane's Tiffany lamps. Shame to break up the collection, but she said you and your father had agreed to sell everything. My stomach lurched. Those lamps had been Mom's pride and joy, collected over decades and meant to be passed down to me. Dad would never willingly part with them. 3 days later, I met with Amanda, a private investigator recommended by a colleague. She was straightforward and efficient. I need everything you can find on Allison Parker, formerly Alice Miller, I explained. Previous marriages, financial history, criminal record, everything. This will take time and money, Amanda warned. I don't care what it costs. My father's life depends on it. While waiting for Amanda's findings, I received an unexpected call from my mother's sister, Aunt Patricia, who lived across the country. I'm sorry I haven't been in touch since the funeral, she began, but I've been thinking about Diane's safety deposit box. Did she ever mention it to you? No, I replied, confused. What's safety deposit box? She set it up years ago, said it contained important documents in case anything happened to her. She made me a co-signer since Greg didn't know about it. Said it was her just-in-case plan. The next day, I met Aunt Patricia at the bank. Inside the small metal box were insurance policies, copies of property deeds, and a sealed envelope addressed to me in Mom's handwriting with instructions. Open only if necessary. The letter inside contained account numbers for investments Mom had made independently, plus a thumb drive. The note explained, I've always believed in having independence within a partnership. This is your safety net, if ever needed. The thumb drive contained copies of all important family documents and photos, a digital backup of our lives together. It was as if Mom had reached through time to help me fight for our family. In that moment, standing in the sterile bank room clutching her letter, something shifted inside me. The fog of depression lifted, replaced by crystal clarity and determination. I wouldn't just accept Dad's rejection. I would fight for him with everything I had. Allison had declared war on our family, and I was finally ready to battle back. That night, I laid out a comprehensive 3-part plan. Gather irrefutable evidence about Allison, build a network of allies who cared about Dad, and create the perfect opportunity to present everything where Allison couldn't control the narrative. Direct confrontation had failed before and would fail again. I needed to be strategic, patient, and more cunning than Allison herself. The next day, I reached out to Dad's longtime best friend Thomas, who had mysteriously fallen out of Dad's life shortly after the wedding. I've been worried sick about Greg, Thomas confessed when we met for coffee. Last time I saw him, Allison answered every question I directed at him. When I asked about a fishing trip, she said his arthritis was acting up. Greg's never had arthritis a day in his life. I need your help, Thomas, I said, explaining my suspicions without revealing my full plan. Will you help me save my dad? His eyes, so like my father's, hardened with resolve. Whatever you need. Greg would do the same for me. My mother's sister provided another crucial piece of the puzzle during a long phone call that evening. Your mother worried sometimes, Aunt Patricia admitted reluctantly. Not about your father's love. Never that. But about his trusting nature. Diane said Greg always looked for the good in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Mom had seen Dad's blind spot, his inability to recognize manipulation because he himself was so straightforward. She had loved that quality in him, but understood its dangers. Now I needed to use that knowledge to break Allison's spell. My strategy required patience and careful maneuvering. First, I needed to make Allison believe I had given up the fight for my father's attention. I gradually decreased my attempts to contact Dad, spacing out messages from daily to weekly to monthly. On social media, I began posting about embracing new beginnings and focusing on my career. Knowing Allison monitored my accounts through Dad's login. Meanwhile, I quietly connected with extended family members Allison had pushed away. Uncle Robert gathered financial records from when he had helped Dad with taxes the previous year. Dad's cousin Nancy, who worked at his architectural firm, reported that he had become withdrawn at work and missed several important meetings, completely out of character for his previously punctual, dedicated approach. Amanda, the private investigator, delivered her initial findings 3 weeks into my plan. Allison's background was more concerning than I'd imagined. Under her previous name, Alice Miller, she had been married twice before, both times to older, financially comfortable men. Both marriages ended within 3 years. The pattern is consistent, Amanda explained, spreading photos across my kitchen table. She targets vulnerable men, usually recently widowed or divorced. Isolates them from family and friends. Gains control of finances. Then either drains accounts and disappears, or if they've signed over enough assets, initiates divorce. But why hasn't anyone reported her? I asked, staring at the damning timeline Amanda had created.
Shame.
Embarrassment. By the time these men realize what's happened, they feel too foolish to come forward. Plus, she's careful to stay just on the legal side of things, getting them to willingly sign documents, grant account access. Amanda located Allison's second ex-husband, William, now living in a modest apartment after previously owning a lakefront home. After initial reluctance, he agreed to speak with me. "I thought she loved me," William said, his voice heavy with lingering humiliation. By the time I realized what was happening, she had convinced me to add her name to everything. Said it was for estate planning purposes since my children from my first marriage weren't speaking to me anymore. He laughed bitterly. Of course, they were speaking to me just fine until Alice came along and told them I didn't want contact. The parallels to my situation were chilling. William provided bank statements showing how Allison had systematically transferred funds to separate accounts before filing for divorce, claiming emotional abandonment. While collecting evidence, I maintained my facade of moving on. I joined a photography class I'd always been interested in, posting about my healing journey and finding myself. I even arranged to be seen around town with Tyler's cousin Michael, creating the impression I was dating. Behind the scenes, I meticulously documented everything: Allison's previous identities and marriages, the pattern of isolation, the financial manipulation, and Dad's personality changes. I created a detailed timeline showing how her behavior matched textbook descriptions of emotional abuse and coercive control. The breakthrough came 6 weeks into my investigation. Amanda uncovered a sealed record under Allison's original name, a charge of financial elder abuse that had been settled out of court 5 years earlier. The victim, a 70-year-old retired professor, had allowed her to manage his finances while recovering from surgery. By the time his daughter discovered the arrangement, Allison had transferred over $200,000 to her personal accounts. While all this was happening, I accidentally encountered Dad at his favorite bookstore, a place he had visited every Saturday morning for as long as I could remember. Seeing him alone was shocking. Allison rarely let him out by himself anymore, according to Thomas. He looked up from an architecture book, surprise and something like longing crossing his face before he composed himself. "Morgan, I didn't expect to see you here." "Just picking up some design references," I said casually, though my heart was racing. Up close, he looked even worse than at the restaurant, thinner, with a grayish tint to his skin and new lines around his eyes. "How have you been?" he asked stiffly.
Good.
"Busy with work. I got that promotion I was hoping for." I deliberately kept my tone light, as if our estrangement was normal. "That's wonderful," he said, a flash of genuine pride breaking through his guarded expression. "I always knew you would."
How about you?
"Working on anything interesting?" He glanced toward the door nervously. "Just the usual. Look, I should go. Allison is waiting in the car." The conversation lasted barely 2 minutes, but it confirmed what I already knew. My real father was still in there somewhere, trapped behind Allison's controlling walls. With my evidence compiled, I moved to phase 2, coordinating with family and friends for the intervention. The timing needed to be perfect, an occasion Allison couldn't control or avoid without raising suspicions. Thomas provided the opening I needed. Greg's 60th birthday is next month, he mentioned during one of our strategy sessions. Allison can't very well object to a small gathering for that milestone without looking suspicious. I recruited Dad's sister Catherine, who agreed to fly in from Arizona for the surprise party. Uncle Robert offered his home as neutral territory for the confrontation. Dad's cousin Nancy arranged to have colleagues from the architectural firm send congratulatory videos, ensuring the event would seem like a genuine celebration rather than the intervention it actually was. Amanda continued her investigation, delivering the final devastating piece of evidence. Bank records showing Allison had transferred over $50,000 from Dad's retirement account to a separate account in her name only. The transactions began 3 months after their wedding, small amounts at first that gradually increased. "This is the smoking gun," Amanda explained. "The account is registered to an LLC she created last year. Based on similar patterns from her previous marriages, she's likely preparing to leave once she's secured enough assets." I compiled everything into a comprehensive document with supporting evidence for each claim. The file included statements from William and the daughter of the retired professor, financial records showing the pattern of asset transfer, documentation of Allison's name change and hidden past, and testimonials from family members about Dad's personality changes and isolation. The night before the intervention, I barely slept.
Dr.
Bennett had helped me practice what to say, emphasizing the importance of approaching Dad with compassion rather than accusation. "Remember, he's a victim in this situation," she had reminded me. "Your anger should be directed at Allison, not at him." I consulted with the lawyer about how to protect Dad financially if things went as planned. Attorney Sarah Marshall outlined the steps we would need to take. Freezing joint accounts, documenting all assets prior to marriage, and potentially filing for an emergency protective order if the evidence of emotional abuse was deemed sufficient by a judge. Financial exploitation of vulnerable adults is taken seriously by the courts, she assured me. But you need to be prepared for the possibility that your father might not be ready to see the truth. Emotional manipulation creates powerful bonds that can be difficult to break. The morning of the intervention, I woke with a sense of both dread and determination. This was potentially my last chance to save Dad from Allison's clutches. If I failed, I might lose him forever. Thomas called to confirm he had successfully invited Dad to this small birthday lunch at Uncle Robert's house. Allison tried to decline on his behalf, said they had other plans, but I insisted it was tradition. She finally agreed when I mentioned several of his colleagues would be there. Probably doesn't want to seem controlling in front of others. Uncle Robert had arranged for Natalie, Dad's favorite niece, to pick them up, eliminating the possibility of Allison driving Dad away once things got uncomfortable. I arrived early to help set up. Catherine, who hadn't seen Dad in over a year, paced nervously in the kitchen. What if this makes things worse? She worried, arranging food she had prepared according to Mom's recipes. What if he chooses her even after seeing all the evidence? Then at least we tried, I replied, though the thought made my stomach knot. We can't just watch him be destroyed by this woman. William, Allison's ex-husband, arrived wearing a suit that hung loosely on his frame. I almost backed out, he admitted. But then I thought about how I wish someone had done this for me before I lost everything. As family members began arriving, carefully selected relatives who had known Dad for decades, I rehearsed my opening statement in my head. The documents were organized in a folder, copies made for everyone present. Amanda would arrive halfway through with the financial evidence, making it impossible for Allison to dismiss everything as family jealousy. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. "On our way. ETA 15 minutes. A look suspicious, but Dad seems happy about the surprise." This was it. After months of planning, years of pain, and countless sleepless nights, I was about to confront the woman who had stolen my father and systematically destroyed our family. The weight of what was about to happen settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. I took a deep breath and nodded to Thomas, who gathered everyone in the living room for final instructions. Remember, this is about saving Greg, not attacking Allison, he reminded the group. Let Morgan lead the conversation. Don't interrupt or get emotional, no matter what Allison says. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway silenced the room. Uncle Robert positioned himself by the door while I stood in the center of the living room, clutching my folder of evidence like a shield. The doorbell rang. Surprise! Everyone called as Uncle Robert swung open the door. Dad stood frozen on the threshold, Allison's hand gripping his arm tightly. His face cycled through emotions, shock, confusion, and then, as he registered the faces of family members he hadn't seen in months, something that looked like relief. What is this? Allison demanded, her voice sharp despite her fixed smile. Just a little birthday gathering for my favorite brother-in-law, Catherine said warmly, stepping forward to embrace Dad. 60 is a big milestone, Greg. Dad hugged her back awkwardly, his eyes darting to Allison for permission. This is unexpected. We can't stay long. We have reservations at. Nonsense, Thomas interrupted, clapping Dad on the shoulder. We've got all your favorites. Catherine even made Diane's famous lasagna recipe. At the mention of Mom's name, Allison's smile tightened further. How thoughtful. But really, we should stick to our plans. Uncle Robert had strategically positioned himself to block the exit.
Come in.
Everyone's been so excited to see you, Greg. They moved into the living room where Dad spotted me. His expression softened momentarily before uncertainty clouded his features again. Morgan, you organized this. We all did, Dad. I replied calmly. Because we care about you. Allison surveyed the room, clearly calculating whether making a scene would damage the image she had carefully cultivated. Deciding to play along temporarily, she settled beside Dad on the sofa, her hand possessively on his knee. For 20 minutes, conversation flowed around neutral topics. Dad gradually relaxed as family members shared memories and updates, though Allison interrupted whenever the discussion veered toward the past or family connections. When Catherine mentioned Mom's birthday tradition of surprise gifts, Allison abruptly stood. I think we should be going now. Greg isn't feeling well. I'm fine, Dad replied, looking confused. You said your head was hurting earlier, she insisted, her fingers digging into his shoulder. It was the opening I needed. I moved to the center of the room, folder in hand. Before you go, Dad, there's something important we need to discuss. My heart hammered in my chest, but my voice remained steady. Something about Allison that you need to know. Allison's expression hardened. This is ridiculous. Greg, they've clearly brought you here under false pretenses for some kind of ambush. It's not an ambush, I continued. It's an intervention because we love you, and we're worried about what's happening to you. Dad looked bewildered. What are you talking about? I opened the folder and began methodically presenting the evidence, starting with Allison's previous identities and marriages. As I spoke, Thomas distributed copies of the documentation to everyone in the room. The woman you know as Allison Parker was born Alice Weston. She changed her name to Alice Miller, then to Allison Parker 5 years ago after settling a case of financial elder abuse out of court. Allison's face flushed dark red. These are lies. Greg, don't listen to this nonsense. I continued calmly. She's been married twice before, both times to recently widowed men with substantial assets. Both marriages ended within 3 years, after she had gained control of their finances. Dad stared at the papers in his hands, his expression unreadable. This is slander, Allison hissed. I'll sue all of you. Truth is an absolute defense against slander, Attorney Sarah Marshall said from her position by the window. And everything Morgan is presenting is documented fact. I nodded to Uncle Robert, who opened the door to admit William. Allison's face drained of color as her ex-husband walked into the room. Hello, Alice, William said quietly. Dad looked up sharply. Who is this? William Thompson, Allison's second husband, I explained. He's here to share his experience. William spoke directly to Dad. She did the same thing to me that she's doing to you. Isolated me from my children and friends. convinced me everyone was against our relationship, gradually took control of my finances. By the time I realized what was happening, she had transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars to accounts I couldn't access. Dad turned to Allison, confusion evident in his expression. Is this true? Do you know this man?
Of course not, she snapped.
This is clearly someone they've paid to lie. I have the marriage certificate and divorce papers right here, I said, sliding them across the coffee table, along with bank records showing the transfers. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically presented evidence of Allison's deception, the hidden criminal record, the pattern of targeting vulnerable widowers, the documented behavior of isolation and control. Dad sat silently, shoulders increasingly hunched as the evidence mounted. Allison alternated between angry denials and tearful accusations of jealousy and conspiracy. The final blow came when Amanda arrived with the financial evidence. She laid out bank statements showing the transfers from Dad's retirement account to Allison's secret LLC. $53,000 has been moved in the last 7 months, Amanda explained gently. Based on the acceleration of transfers, she was likely planning to empty the account within another 6 months. Dad stared at the bank statements, recognition dawning on his face. These are from my retirement fund, the one I started when Morgan was born. Yes, I confirmed softly. The college fund you converted after I finished school. The one you always said would be your fishing boat fund someday. Something broke in Dad's expression, the protective shell of denial cracking to reveal the pain underneath. Allison, he asked, his voice barely audible. Is this true? Have you been taking money from my accounts? Sensing she was losing control of the narrative, Allison switched tactics. It was for us, Greg. For our future together. These people are trying to come between us because they can't stand seeing you happy with someone other than Diane. That's not true, Catherine interjected. We wanted Greg to find happiness after Diane died. What we didn't want was to see him manipulated and isolated from everyone who loves him. Allison stood suddenly, rage distorting her carefully maintained facade. This is all Morgan's doing. She's been jealous from day one, trying to keep you all to herself like some twisted daddy's girl. She couldn't stand sharing your attention with anyone else. The cruel words hung in the air. Dad looked up at Allison, really seeing her perhaps for the first time. Don't talk about my daughter that way, he said quietly. Your precious daughter, who couldn't let you move on with your life? Allison sneered. The one who constantly brought up your dead wife to make me feel like an outsider. Dad flinched at the callous reference to Mom. Diane was Morgan's mother. And she's dead, Allison snapped. It's time everyone accepted that and moved on instead of living in some shrine to Saint Diane. The room fell silent. Dad slowly stood, his face ashen but his eyes clearing. I'd like you to leave, he said to Allison, his voice gaining strength with each word.
What?
Allison's composure cracked completely. I said, I want you to leave. Now. You can't be serious. You're choosing them over me? After everything I've done for you? Dad looked at her steadily. What exactly have you done for me, Allison? Isolated me from my family? Stolen my money? Made me doubt my own daughter? Allison's face contorted with fury. You pathetic old man. You think your precious family cares about you? They just want your money too. The difference is, Dad replied calmly, they loved me before I had any. Allison grabbed her purse, spitting final threats as she stormed toward the door. This isn't over. I'll take you for everything in the divorce. I think the evidence of financial fraud will make that difficult, Attorney Sarah interjected smoothly. Not to mention the precedent set by your previous divorces. After Allison slammed out of the house, a heavy silence fell. Dad stood motionless in the center of the room, looking suddenly older and infinitely tired. Then, without warning, he crumpled into the nearest chair and began to sob, deep, wrenching cries that seemed to come from his very soul. I rushed to him, wrapping my arms around his shaking shoulders. I'm so sorry, Morgan, he gasped between sobs. I'm so sorry. What have I done? It's okay, Dad, I whispered, my own tears falling. It's not your fault. I chose her over you. I let her come between us. How can you ever forgive me? There's nothing to forgive, I insisted, holding him tighter. She manipulated you when you were vulnerable. She's done this before. The following weeks were difficult beyond measure. Dad moved temporarily into Uncle Robert's guest room while attorney Sarah filed emergency orders to freeze joint accounts and document the unauthorized transfers. The investigation revealed even more financial damage than we had initially discovered. Allison had taken out loans against the house and run up credit card debt in Dad's name. The legal proceedings to annul the marriage based on fraud were grueling. Allison fought viciously, but the overwhelming evidence of her pattern of behavior across multiple marriages eventually forced her to settle rather than face potential criminal charges for financial exploitation. Dad fell into a deep depression as the full reality of his manipulation became clear. I gave her access to everything, he confessed during a particularly dark evening. Not just the money, but my heart, my trust. I betrayed your mother's memory. Mom would understand, I assured him, though my own heart ached at how thoroughly Allison had damaged him. She knew you better than anyone. She'd want you to heal, not punish yourself. Dr. Bennett agreed to see us for family therapy, helping Dad process the shame and guilt that threatened to overwhelm him. What you experienced was a form of emotional abuse, she explained. The isolation, the gaslighting, the control, these are tactics abusers use to break down their victim's sense of self. Slowly, painfully, Dad began to rebuild his life. Extended family rallied around him, helping repair the connections Allison had severed. Thomas took him fishing on weekends. Catherine called daily from Arizona. Colleagues welcomed him back, understanding now why he had withdrawn. Our relationship required its own healing. There were moments of anger I couldn't suppress, flashes of hurt when I remembered how he had chosen Allison over me. But beneath that pain was the unshakable foundation of 30 years of love. 6 months after the intervention, Dad moved back into the family home, which we had redecorated together, deliberately incorporating Mom's favorite colors and some of her rescued possessions. The Tiffany lamps were gone forever, but we found one of her paintings in a local consignment shop and restored it to its place above the fireplace. On the anniversary of Mom's death, Dad and I visited her grave together for the first time since before Allison. We placed fresh daisies, Mom's favorite, and sat on the bench nearby. Your mother was the wisest person I've ever known, Dad said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. She would have seen through Allison immediately. She did try to warn us in her way, I replied, telling him about the safety deposit box and Mom's letter. Dad smiled sadly. That sounds like Diane. Always thinking ahead, protecting her family. As we walked back to the car, Dad stopped and turned to me. I need you to know something, Morgan. What happened with Allison, that wasn't love. What your mother and I had, that was love. Real, honest, supportive love that made both of us better people. I squeezed his hand. I know, Dad. And what you did for me, fighting for me even when I pushed you away, that's love too. The kind I hope I taught you by example before I lost my way. In the year since we exposed Allison's true nature, I've learned profound lessons about family, forgiveness, and resilience. I've learned that love sometimes means fighting for someone who can't fight for themselves. That forgiveness isn't a single moment, but a daily choice. That healing isn't linear but happens in fits and starts, good days and bad. Most importantly, I've learned that while boundaries are essential to healthy relationships, some bonds are worth fighting for with everything you have. Dad continues to rebuild his financial security and emotional well-being. We have weekly dinners again, and he's recently started mentoring young architects at his firm, something he always wanted to do, but Allison discouraged. As for me, I've found strength I never knew I possessed. The girl who fell apart when her father chose someone else is gone, replaced by a woman who knows her own worth and the power of determined love. Have you ever had to fight for a relationship that matters to you? What would you have done in my situation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones most worth fighting. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, true family never gives up on each other.